So I got my hands on the Pro Staff X pretty quick, and obviously paint job, big difference. But even more exciting than that is the fact that this is the first 100 square inch head size Pro Staff. I think traditionally we're used to thinking of this as a 97 square inch racket. Before that it was even smaller, and before that even smaller. It's one of those things. So I'm sure different people have different feelings on whatever the Pro Staff traditionally is. But for me it was the 97, and one of the rackets I probably held on to the longest and called mine was the Pro Staff Autograph. And that was the first version to come out with matte black. I recently shared a short of a custom paint job that I did on two of them, which was partly inspired by a very common paint defect that Pro Staff was well known for. So I figured why not just get all the paint off and put my own on there. Point being, I was a Pro Staff fan for quite some time, and I was excited to see the first 100 square inch Pro Staff. So let's get into this review. So if you haven't seen it in person already, I do think that this paint job is relatively stunning. Let's just say that. This color shift paint or chameleon paint, I'm a fan. I actually like the blacked out Pro Staff. I thought that was a good look, but I wasn't really a fan of the aesthetic that a lot of the blades did. And then the Pro Staff tried to do it too, the Pro Staff Tuxedo, but the blade just kind of having those green lines on the side around the 3 and the 9, I just thought, this paint job is definitely more interesting. And it's still identifiable. No one else really has a color shifting racket going on. So, kudos to Wilson for innovating their paint, because I was getting a little bit tired of that aesthetic that was just a bunch of hard lines with nothing else really going on. Anyway, the first thing I'll say is it does feel like a Pro Staff. Now, that might not seem like a very descriptive thing, but I do feel like there are certain racket families that just feel very that, and it becomes like a way of describing how a racket feels, and a Pro Staff is kind of in that category. Now, I consider the Pro Staff to be a really versatile racket. Like, if you want to generate a lot of spin, you can. If you want to plow through the ball, nice and hard, kind of just straight penetration, you can do that too. And I think one of the tricks to the Pro Staff being able to achieve that is generally having a high static weight. And the autograph version, which may or may not be discontinued now that Federer isn't playing. So if you are actually skilled enough to wield a racket like that, you'll be able to generate quite a lot of topspin or change up your swing a little bit and hit right through the ball. So I was curious if this racket has that kind of versatility to it. And I would say that it actually does, but it does lean a little more towards that spin-friendly swing style. Now, in its stock form, I actually thought this racket would be a little bit more hefty feeling in the hand, but it's actually quite whippy. In a lot of ways, it sort of swings like a pure arrow might, but it has some of the stability and penetration you might associate with a Pro Staff. So that's kind of where this racket gets interesting for me. Two rackets that I know really well recently and have become my reference points as far as rackets go would be the Ezo 98 and the Shift 315, I guess. Which one sounds better? I don't know. But I would say that both of those rackets actually feel a little bit less stable than this one, especially the Ezo 98. Like, I don't think of the 98 as being a very stable racket, which is one of the reasons I think it is so insanely spin friendly despite having a dense string pattern. I'll get into that in an official Ezo 98 review. But yeah, this racket is very stable. In terms of how the racket feels, I did say it feels like a Pro Staff. I think some people will be like, I know what you mean, and other people are like, well, what do you mean? Elaborate a little. So I would describe the Pro Staff as feeling like a very solid racket. It just has this kind of perfect middle ground between being stiff but also being comfortable. And when it's right in the middle, I would say that it's kind of solid. It has a very solid feel. But when I say that word, it's more so to describe how the racket feels. It's not necessarily a way to describe how stiff the racket actually is. Some of the language in the world of tennis specs get a little bit funky and a little bit blurry. And in some future content, I'm going to find my own way to describe how a racket feels in a way that is familiar to you guys. So I'm working on something like that, and I look forward to bringing that into some future content. As far as how the racket feels, I'll say solid, and I think you know what I mean. Like, it doesn't feel boardy. Some of the Babolat rackets feel boardy, and some of the Players rackets or the V-Core Pro Series, I would almost describe as feeling a little bit too mushy. There's sort of this dead, metallic, mushy feeling. I wouldn't say the Pro Staff feels like that either, but it does have elements and characteristics of both sides of that spectrum, but it finds itself right in the middle, and that's why I'm saying solid, because it's a bit of both. Now, compared to the 97, which is probably the most common comparison people want to see, understandably, I would say is really in how it kind of wants to be played. I think this racket is tweaked to be a little bit more spin friendly. It also swings a bit lighter. It's just got a whippier play style to it. And between this and the Pro Staff, I actually feel like they aren't so far apart that I can't play with one, or I play with one maybe better necessarily than the other one. I might be more of a Pro Staff 97 guy actually, but I could switch this in without having to make too many major adjustments. Maybe this racket's a little bit more user friendly than the standard Pro Staff, but it's still a Pro Staff, and in a lot of ways I would kind of recommend this for the intermediate and up players. Now, contrary to a couple of other reviews that I saw out there, I saw that some people said that this racket has a massive sweet spot, and I disagree with that. I've been playing with the Shift, which I feel like has a pretty big sweet spot. Again, I strung that racket at 44 pounds, so maybe the sweet spot feels a little bit exaggerated, but I also hit with the Ezo 98, and I feel like I got that tension dialed in That's a massive sweet spot on the EZO 98. This one, it feels pretty average. I don't feel like it's a massive sweet spot. But the funny thing about sweet spot is I think how you interpret sweet spot can really change based on how you swing. And I really just mean that if you're a super brushy topspin heavy player, the type of racket that feels like it has a big sweet spot for you might not be the same as someone who hits straight through the ball and pretty flat. And that has to do with how the racket wants to move through the ball. So while I personally don't feel like this sweet spot is massive, maybe I can see why some people would feel that way. However, I would say that the sweet spot is pretty average. And one of the ways in which I could kind of defend my argument is that these little bulges that the Pro Staff is known for actually shorten the length of the crosses right in the sweet spot section. And you think about a racket like the Yonex stuff, they advertise the isometric head size, which actually expands the sweet spot by making the mains and the crosses longer than your typical elliptical frame. So this being a typical elliptical frame and also making it with these bulges that literally shorten the length of the cross strings in the sweet spot. But I know a lot of people associate weight and stability to complement the sweet spot or even move the sweet spot. I've heard people talk about adding weight to the 3 and 9 or moving it up, and that will move the sweet spot up. But that again gets into some territory where I start to disagree, because I really feel like the sweet spot, no matter what the balance of the racket is always going to be around the center of the string bed. And I don't think moving weight up is going to change the center point of the racket, which is still the sweet spot. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the sweet spot of the Pro Staff X. It's not small, but it's not big. So what are my official feelings on this racket? Well, I used to be a Pro Staff guy, and when I first bought my Pro Staff Autograph, I bought it with the intention of buying a racket that was a little bit too heavy for me because I thought it would exploit some of the slop or imperfections of my take back. So it would be so obvious to me that I have to fix this. I have to fix this because it's so heavy. This racket's so heavy. If I don't fix this, my arm's gonna be too tired, etc. So I bought the Pro Staff with the intention of using it to fix or clean up my swing a little bit. And I think I had the Pro Staff for a couple years, and then I started hitting with some really high level guys that are blasting the ball back so fast, so consistently all the time, every shot. And I realized that their pace is so fast that I have less time to take my racket back. And I felt as though the extra weight on the Pro Staff Autograph was actually a bit of a crutch, because once you do get that racket moving, the racket does feel very stable and you're able to deal with pace a lot. But I also felt like, what if I'm relying on the weight too much to generate my own stability? So I started to dial the weight back a little bit, and I went back into the rabbit hole, and that's a different story. That was a little while ago, but I do have history with the Pro Staff Autograph. Now, this racket is definitely not that heavy. I'd say it swings and feels somewhere in the tweener spec range. You could make a case for being a little bit closer to the advanced side of that spectrum. I'd say this racket would fit the description of something sort of in the middle and end of the tweener spectrum, whereas rackets like the Babolat Pure Aero or the EZO 98 are kind of at the beginning of that spectrum. Whereas a racket like the Pro Staff Autograph or the Pure Strike 1820 are beyond that spectrum. Now you've gotten into another category that is no longer in between. It just is like an advanced, heavy, super hefty racket. And interestingly enough, I think the modern game has dialed back a little bit from heavier rackets. I think there was a time where the game wasn't quite as spin heavy as it is now. So I think the way that you actually want to hit a ball for a lot of players, it's very subjective, but a slightly lighter racket actually favors the modern game more. I mean, you got to realize tennis was coming from a place where everyone's rackets were made of wood. They were super heavy. Everybody had a one-handed backhand, and everyone's swing had so much extension. It was so much about like hitting through the ball. But we have all these mechanics now, polyester strings, the head sizes got a lot bigger, the game got a lot faster. And it gets to a point where to keep your ball in the court, if you're hitting it that hard, you got to get it over the net and still get it in the court. And I think the only way to achieve that after a certain level of pace is by generating spin. And I think the Pro Staff racket is interesting because you can look at some of the design changes over time, and it's pretty exemplary of the changes that happened in tennis. You can see how the Pro Staffs over the years have changed to keep up with the changes of tennis. And Federer is an interesting case because he has increased his head size over the years of his career at the top of the game. So I just think that the Pro Staff really represents a lot of history in the tennis world. And now we're at this era in the Pro Staff family that we have 100 square inch Pro Staff. And I wonder how much of that decision is influenced by the fact that we don't really have Roger Federer endorsing the Pro Staff like we did. I mean, he still might, kind of like how Michael Jordan endorses those shoes, even though he doesn't really play basketball anymore. I think it's just going to hit people differently if we know that Roger Federer isn't out there winning Grand Slams or playing in the tournaments. So perhaps this is a racket to get people excited about the Pro Staff lineup, despite the fact that Roger Federer has retired. Anyway, the simplest way I can put it, my final thoughts on this racket are, if you are a Pro Staff fan, but you want something that's a little bit more tweaked in the direction of spin and a brushier swing style that still maintains a lot of the feel and stability that you can expect from a pro staff, this would be one to consider. But I'll tell you one thing. One thing that right away made me not want to consider switching to this racket, well, first of all, the string pattern is too open for me, and you guys know how crazy I am about that. And again, these are just my opinions. I'm not saying how I feel is how you should feel. But yeah, for me, the string pattern is a little bit more open than I want. And also, I've been talking about this in a lot of my shorts, this racket doesn't use parallel drilling, which is interesting to me. Like, why does the Pro Staff not have parallel drilling, but the Wilson Shift does and the Wilson Clash does? I find that to be kind of interesting. I believe the blade also doesn't. See, to me, parallel drilling is a really practical manufacturing innovation that should be on like every single racket. And so it's strange to me that Wilson is making some of their rackets with that and some of their rackets without that. I'd really love to talk to somebody that knows why that could be. Maybe changing this design to being a parallel drill design would mess with the feel too much, and it would take them a few generations to kind of get that right. I know Yonex at some point switched from standard drilling to parallel drilling, and people maybe complained a little bit about how the E-zones felt for a while. But a lot of rackets don't do that, surprisingly. However, I've just gotten to a point where my criteria basically requires that a racket has parallel drilling, or I won't even consider it. But that's just me. Anyway, I gotta wrap it up before this battery dies. It's flashing on me, so I see you. And I will see you guys in a future video. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out the links in the description to get 10% off of Restring Zero, which is an insanely good string. Massive, massive snapback on that string. I think Restring Zero is on course to upset the whole string industry, so we'll see about that. But yeah, link below, 10% off. I will see you guys in a future video. Let me know if you guys want to see a review of any other Pro Staffs. I just thought this one in particular was worth doing because it's really new. All right, I'll catch you guys in a future one. Battery's gonna go out any second now. Thanks for watching. Oh, and shoutouts to Courtside Tennis for the demo.